How's it going, everyone? We're gonna be talking about some Kamigawa Neon Destiny cards, and we are have some guests. We have Benedict Gruber and Electric Bob. For those who don't know, Benedict is a great Jun player with a bunch of top eights and trophies in his career, and we have Electric Bob, who is the Golgari aggro guy. Loves to uh, play within black green and loves to innovate and kind of push the envelope of all these colors in BGX. And I think that's kind of what stirred the discussion why we were making this content here, is because I feel like I gathered great players who love to push the envelope. I feel like decks that are in BGX, we kind of have this boomer moniker, but I have a couple of people who really like to test things, really try to explore, what new cards that can maybe be playable in Jund or Abzan or Rock or BGX in general. So I think this is going to be really fun, and hopefully this will be content that people like. So I don't know, Benedict, if you want to introduce yourself, shout your socials and stuff, and follow with you, Electric Bob.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks for having me. I think this is a great opportunity to push the mid-range archetype a little further. So I don't have YouTube, but I'm active on Twitch. That's Twitch TV at ElectricBob31 ItsSanitoeter. Um, and on Twitter, that's uh, I think at Gruber_Benedict. If not, I think Kevin has the right socials somewhere.
It'll all be in the description,
Yeah,
hopefully.
so yeah, that's pretty good. So as you already said, I'm mostly a gent guy, and I think I developed the archetype quite a bit, so maybe I know what I'm talking about.
Just a little.
Yeah, and I'm Electric Bob. I'm on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter, all at ElectricBob31, and I play the best mid-range deck here. So I've been doing a lot of stuff with the Rock lately. I think, or as Goldfish calls it, Golgari aggro. But I think I have pretty much established that deck, and a lot of people have been trying it. Tried out Reclaimer in our list, and it kind of developed that card as actually a mid-range card rather than just like a Titan card or a Lands Matters card. Well, it does do land stuff, but basically just doing rock stuff. Test every other other stuff every once in a while, like Jund and etc. But mainly just a rock person.
And I'm really glad you brought up Reclaimer, because I think that's a really good example of a card that might be really good in, Rock or Jund, but might not necessarily be good in Abzan. And these little minor details, why you think that it should just be good, because it's like people kind of assume that Abzan, Rock, or Jund are all just the same, and it's not true. I feel like there are cards like Dark Confidant, Witherbloom Command, Fatal Push, like these cards are it's contextual, and cards are just better in
Hmm.
certain decks and not others. I think this is where it's going to be cool to talk about these spoilers, because these cards might be great in Abs and a Rock, but not Jund. Or like, we have like this kind of, it's not even like a Venn diagram. It's like a three-way where it's like we can kind of see what cards are good in some and not others, or is it good in all three, that are black race or black based or green based.
Yep.
So cool. And I think this is going to be kicked off with a great example, the channel lands. I guess one of you guys can pick off on Boseiju. We can talk about Boseiju first, because that's the card that was supposedly like break modern. It's supposed to destroy it with Ren and Six, and it's gonna you be able to stone rain everyone every turn. So what do you guys think about this?
Go first, Bob.
Sure. I mean, so the things I like about these quite a bit is, first of all, they are utility lands first and foremost. I mean, there's no denying that. Allowing you to be able to destroy, specifically Boseiju is pretty good against Hammer, which is something I'm not going to say we struggled with, but it's definitely a close matchup. And having a way to destroy an artifact enchantment or even a saga is pretty sweet. And specifically for Rock, I really enjoyed Takenuma because me and Benny, we talked about this plenty of times, but so something that Jun has that the Rock doesn't is the ability to buy back Luris, and I'm pretty sure Abzan doesn't have a way either. And just having that ability on a swamp, essentially, well, it is a little bit different than a swamp. It's really nice to have that Kolaghan's command like esque effect to buy back a creature. And like, I don't know, as people say, the opportunity cost of these cards is like almost zero. Blood Moon, another issue. There's a lot of other problems with this. And something that I'm a little bit jealous of is Ragavan making these cheaper. So yeah, I'm kind of curious what you think about these, because like they're a little bit better with Ridden 6 and Ragavan allowed them to be cheaper and a little bit more recurable.
Yeah, so that's something I wanted to touch on in general to these lands. That like Jund has the advantage of having this legendary one drop that like Absen and the Rock struggle with. And just in general, my latest iteration plays a lot of legendary creatures like Lurrus, Torok, and Ragavan, obviously. And like that's some really nice additions. Just like Boseiju for one mana is just very, very good. That being said, what I think we should clarify is that, let's say Takenuma has a wider variety of good matchups or where it's doing something, whereas Boseiju has like these very specific good spots like Tron, Titan. You may already mentioned Hammer Time. Basically, every matchup where Boseiju hits something, it's clearly the best of those channel lands, I feel like. And what I like most about these is the first copy is always close to free. So when you can afford to have a like monocolored, basically legendary swamp or forest, the first copy is almost always free to include in your deck. And especially with both of us being on Reclaimer versions currently, I think the opportunity cost of just having a land early that you can just play and later sack with Reclaimer just is so low that you almost always want at least one of those in your BGX deck right now.
I think that's interesting to hear that it's quote unquote free, and I think that really kind of distinguishes how different our archetypes are, because I think in a two color deck like Golgari where you're only two colors and we're playing four sagas, you're still playing, before Saga was around, you'd still play like 5 to 6, maybe close to 7 basics when there was like Fuel to Ruin in the deck. So like you can cut a couple basic forests and a basic swamp for a Takenuma. Like I think that's really free. I think when you start getting to like 3 colors, I think that's where it gets pretty sketchy. In terms of meeting your color requirements. And I think Jund can get away with it with Ren and 6 and Ragavan making treasures. But like Abzen's definitely handicapped in that department. So like when you're like a black-white base, I don't think Besaiger's free at all because, the green is the splash color. In the respective, like if you have like a black green based Abzan deck, you can probably squeeze in the Boseiju. But with all the powerful white cards like Esper Sentinel, Prismatic Ending, March, Kai's got like you're kind of more on the white base instead of the green, which makes Boseiju a lot harder. But I agree with you, Sani, that like Boseiju is probably the most strongest one just because it's a pure removal spell. But even something like Takenuma, I've tested it a bunch, and when you compare it to something like Urborg, where we also run Turak, we play Voidwalker, we have Dam, like we have a lot of double black, which is pretty color intensive. And again, we don't have Red and 6 or Ragavan to kind of help, fix our colors. So I've noticed with a bigger sample size, like I feel like Urborg is just cleaner in helping us make mana, especially with Saga. So it's interesting to see that like I would agree that's more free in Abzan or in Jund and Rock, but definitely not free in Abzan. So it's kind of cool to kind of compare and contrast, these lands and all of our archetypes.
It's interesting. So what I also think is that Absan lacking some way to actually get rid of those lands again. So let's say you need the turn 1 discard spell of Takenuma. You basically have no way of actually using the land this game, right? It's just sitting there.
Yep.
Yeah, and so both Rock and Absan having Reclaimer, where it's like no thought has to be spent if you ever want to use the ability again. It's just so sweet, and I think it's a really nice addition to those kind of strategies.
Yeah, I know
For
Bob
sure.
has
I
been.
also want to say that. Oh,
No, go
no, go
ahead.
ahead. You go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, Bob,
Oh, okay.
you've
I want to
been
talk about.
playing like Golgari Rot Farm as a way to like recur the lands, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Golgari Rat Farm has been an MVP that I have additional. Or, firstly, I kind of said it as a joke in my Discord. I was like, what if we play Rot Farm? It's kind of a joke. Like, why would you ever want to play it? But it's been very, very good with the channel lands. And I also want to say that in Abzan, you don't have a way to recur these, unlike. I mean, obviously, Ren 6 is a little bit better than than Witherbloom Command with like consistently recurring these lands. But like, I think your list. Do you even play a Witherbloom Command anymore? I know you did at first, but like, you don't even have a way to recur these, which makes them a little bit weaker as well.
Yeah, I definitely don't play Witherbloom Command, but I think it's one of my to-do lists to try this combination. It just every time I like draft a list, I'm like, I'm gonna try this with channel lands. I'm like, I have like 12 white sources and like 13 black sources. It's like I can't consistently cast my spells, and I think that's
Yeah.
also a kind of a deck building style because I saw you when you were playing your Golgari Splash Ragavan. It's like I think you had like 12 or 11 red sources. I was like, how did you cast Ragavan in this league?
I'm greedy. I'm greedy. That's just how it
Also,
is.
something I realized with my first draft, where I was on like 2 Boseiju, 2 Takenuma, that my red sources were kind of lacking. Because I was cutting all the fast lands, so Blackleaf Cliffs, and like I was down to like 12 red sources or something along those lines, and it was kind of rough. So the mana base needed some rework after that. But what I think is nice in Sun specifically about Takenuma is the ability, like, at any point of the game you can recur Lurus, recur Renin 6, and just go again, and your opponent basically cannot interact unless counter spells, of course, with that, because removal just doesn't cut it, and you basically grind down your opponent no matter what.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what Abzan and the Rock are missing to kind of abuse these lands a little.
For sure.
Yeah, I kind of forgot that this could also recur Renin 6. That's actually kind of crazy. Like having a free way to like I know a lot of like Luris lists, used to play like a one of Unearth, and that kind of one copy, just a way to recur it, is nice. I mean, Jund already had Kolaghan's command to recur it, but now you have a way to like recur Luris and Renin 6 is kind of crazy.
Yeah, it basically goes infinite. And like also with the Reclaimer list, it's very slow, but you can't just search these out when you have like a turn off. Let's say nothing is really happening. You just search out Takenuma, sack it the next turn, and basically as long as you draw Renin 6 eventually, you're good to go. And that's also what Abzan is missing. So the ability to, let's say, search out your lands. Basically, you don't have an ability to draw you basically only can draw lands, right? You have no card selection.
I think that just proves how broken Renin 6 is. The more they print these kind of lands, these utility lands, which they've been doing a lot of in the past couple of years, it just makes Renin 6 get better and better, right?
I also, like I mentioned this in my recent Reclaimer article, that Reclaimer will only go up in value the more utility lands enter the format. I was kind of comparing it to the Dragon Rage Channeler slot. Like that's always being a 3/3 flying, whereas the Reclaimer will only improve with more utility lands in the format.
And like there's also like utility lands that we're even talking about, like with Bajuka Bog, Blast Zone, Ghost Quarter. Like these are the lands that I feel like are in and out of your guys' 75. I think Bajuka Bob is a good example of something that Reclaimer just being able to instant speed exile something just increases the utility of the card. I don't know if it's still in your guys' decks, but just another example of Reclaimer just like these kind of cards are just like coming together with Renin 6, and these lands are only going to make the mana base more shakier, but probably more powerful. Like it's like a higher ceiling, but like a lower floor in terms of consistency, right?
Yeah. So what, like, let's say Bojuka Borg has like as a disadvantage is like enters the battlefield tapped, and coming back to those two, so Boseiju and Takenuma, those are untapped lands. You always have to keep that in mind. Those are just untapped monocolored sources. And that's what makes them so strong, and that's why I also feel like I want to say close to free as an inclusion. If you can, for sure, like support the monocolored mana base.
And then Bob, I know you.
So when are you trying out a Golgari?
I know, Bob, you
ahead,
have playing like 4 Witherbloom commands. Like I know you played 4 Witherbloom commands before these channel lands, but how much better has that card gotten since these channel lands have been printed?
I want to say probably like 50% better. I know that's not very clear, but quite a bit better. I mean, just the ability to get back, like, you essentially always got back an Urza Saga if you could before this, and now it really adds some diversity, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to play the deck, I'd say, because there are definitely times where it's like, okay, I need to get back a Boseiju, but sometimes, since I'm running an expedition map, you can almost go for the long haul where it's like, all right, do I need it now? Or do I need to get this, Urza Saga going, get some creatures, and then once that... I mean, I think you were in one of my streams, KO, where I had a really convoluted line where I, like, got an expedition map, blew up something. It was, like, against Hammer, and it was, like... I remember, like, a bunch of people were, oh, that's a really cool line, because, like, these, like, long-term lines with Urza Saga really, like... I don't know, having that expedition map to find these, I think that's the card that's improved the most, whereas Witherbloom Command hasn't as much for me, personally.
And would you say Expedition Map is like locked in your deck now with these channel lands?
Yeah.
Because I always feel like people...
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because, like, I played Expedition Map a couple of times, and I always found it to be, like, totally useless. I never wanted to get it. So in theory, you could go, like, make it 2 constructs, get Expedition Map, get another Saga, make more constructs.
Yeah.
But,
exactly
like, when I played it, it always felt terrible. I never wanted to do that. It's so mana intensive. And, like, maybe it's due to having more constant access to my Ren and 6 recurring the sagas, so I don't need to get new ones. But Expedition Map felt terrible for me.
Yeah, I think it's better in the Rock specifically because you don't have that like Ren and 6 effect, and you don't really need. I think in Abzan you need more slots for other things where we have a little bit more flexibility, just being 2 colors and having I think a little bit more flexibility in the list specifically, whereas you are kind of more locked in on specific cards that you need. Like you need Ragavans and Ren and 6s. I think if you're not playing those in Jund, unless you're me, of course, then you're crazy. But I don't know. I think those cards are pretty much locked in, and like with the Rock specifically, like you have decisions between Dothy, Bob, or all sorts of 2-drops. Every slot is kind of flexible. Witherbloom Command can even be flexible, although I would recommend at least playing 2 or 3 in the list, whereas I'm on 4, but at least 2 or 3.
Cool. I guess we could talk about the rest of the cycle since we're not going to play the blue one. But I guess we could talk about Sokenzan and Eiganjo. Sadie, do you want to talk about your testing about Sokenzan if you've done any?
So, fun fact, when I tested it, I didn't know the tokens had haste. So for everyone to know, the tokens have haste. But other than that, so my first impression and what I talked about on stream already is the red one is worse than Urza Saga or the other channel lands. Not specifically, I want to say Boseiju over the course of the entire metagame, but like Boseiju has the highest upside, lowest floor. I want to say it's clearly the best when it's relevant. It's basically useless when it's a fair matchup. And Sokenzan has like this in the middle of the pack, I want to say, where it's like, yeah, 2/1/1s is not the worst, but it's on like when you play it, it's just not impactful enough. Like 2/1/1s get outclassed by pretty much everything. And the only reason I actually considered playing this was, as I mentioned before, the lack of red sources I had. And that's why I tested it, and it was exactly how I expected it to be. So you almost always want Ursa Saga for the tokens. So if you have the choice getting back Ursa Saga or getting back that one, just get Ursa Saga. And if you want, let's say, some utility, some card advantage, then Takenuma is just a better one because it gets back arguably more impactful threats like Kamogab, let's say. And that's why, like, the land is fine, but I don't think you should run it enchant. The odds are just better.
It's funny when you're like, oh, you can make 2/1/1s, and then like you're talking to the Lingering Souls player here. Like making 2/1/1s is fantastic. That's uncounterable, and they have haste. It's just funny.
How, like, Lingering Souls has flying. Like that's
right.
And it's
you're
4/1/1s.
not running into opposing shadows or whatever. And like these guys are just 1/1s. With haste.
Yeah, with haste.
With haste, yeah.
I think this is the type of card that, like, if you have, like, let's say if there's like a Rakdos Saga list, which I want to make a side note, I think that's something that hasn't been explored yet. I think people have been like just copying Aspiring Spike's, Rakdos list that doesn't have Saga. I think that a Rakdos Saga list is very viable, and in that type of deck, I think this card can slot in. When they're probably running like 2 or 3 basic mountains, I think this is a slot where it could easily be free, right? And this kind of goes back to our discussion earlier, where like if it's free in a 2-color mana base with Saga, I think this card slots in nicely. But for Eiganjo, I think this card's really good. I don't know what your guys' opinions on it with the 4 damage, but I think just having a removal spell on a land is very, very good. I think it's not comparable to Boseiju in terms of power level, but it's comparable to Boseiju in like a utility sense. Because we're used to these man lands that make creatures. We're not really used to these lands being removal spells. But having a meta with Solitude or Fury that get dodged, we can't answer it with Fatal Push or Prismatic Ending or Portable Hole. This Eiganjo being able to destroy those pesky elementals, like I've died to Fury too many times because I can't push it. So I think Eiganjo is really, really good. It's just a matter of being able to fit in that free white source. But I think Eiganjo is a little underrated in my opinion. I don't know what you guys think, but again, like a free removal spell on a land, I think is a really, really high floor.
Yeah, I think it's kind of underplayed because, like, again, the first copy is close to free in the decks that run white. And fun fact, I had a Torak that has protection from white being tried to kill by Eiganjo, but they grew it when discarding the land to 5 toughness.
Oh my gosh.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
That's like
especially so not mid-range related, but the blue-white decks, let's say, that struggle against something like Torak really benefit from a colorless removal spell, basically, on a land.
Yeah.
It's just funny too, because when we were mentioning Torak, like there's so many times where like a control player would cycle a Shark Typhoon, and I'm like, oh, like now it's lethal now. Thanks, like it's kind of the discard ability of Torak is subtly very relevant, and I didn't think about these channel lands associated with that either.
What about those faithful mendings? That was my favorite one. Whenever anyone faithful mendings, I'm like, oh yeah, give me those 2 counters. But to talk about the Eiganjo, I played a little bit of control. I'm not very good with it, but like I've noticed with, as you said, Sani, with Torak being a really big problem, I know before these got printed, like the only way you could deal with it was Supreme Verdict, and that freaking sucks, right? Like you had the Supreme Verdict, just one threat that already 2-for-1'd you. It feels like a 5-for-1 at that point, and just doesn't feel very strong, you know. And like just having that ability as a colorless ability to get rid of it is just huge.
Yeah, I agree with that. And like, I know we're not touching on the blue one here, but I think also that one is really good. Just on the opportunity cost is so low, and the bounce spell is very relevant. And that's also what I feel like with the white one.
So, would you say that these were poorly designed lands?
Oh, I like
You wanna
them.
go first? You like them?
Yeah, I think so. I think having lands with abilities leads to less non-games where you're either flooding. So the most games I hate usually one player is either flooding or screwing around, and I don't like that. Even if like you get free wins from time to time, but I feel like that's just undeserving. And everything that leads to less non-games where these are just flood protection basically, and I like that. And I think they are good enough designed where they are expensive enough for the channel abilities where they can't be easily abused. Like even Boseiju costing 2 respective 1 against something like Tron, you can't easily abuse them where you just basically kill someone on turn 2. Want to say I also had that happen a couple of times, especially against Belcher, where I just from turn 2 onwards, let's go. But like these are the exception and not the rule, I want to say. And therefore I think the design is pretty good. And yeah, I would like to see more of those, to be honest.
Personally, one thing I do like the fact that they have this channel effect. I obviously I'm not in design at all, so I take my take with a grain of salt. But one thing I really dislike is the fact that I think these are a little bit unreasonable with their costs. Like Boseiju at 2 mana to me is a little absurd. I kind of wish it was 3 mana, even though like it helps me out that it's 2 mana. I would really like it to be a little bit more on par with the rest of them. Like the fact that Eiganjo is, I would say, just about at like similar power level as the Boseiju. The fact that it's on 3 mana to me is like freaking bizarre as heck. And like the fact that you also, I think it's a little unfair with the legendary creatures. I wish they just either errated that thing or just made it like permanence, which I mean, obviously legendary permanence would be a little bit better. I think it's like flavor aspect with creatures, but I really wish that they either got rid of that or put it on legendary permanence. And I mean, obviously they'd be a lot better with permanence, but I just feel like it's a little bit, you know, Ragavan oriented where the format's already Ragavan oriented, and I don't really love that.
I mean, just where the design is going to, it just seems like they're going to be printing these with like the double face lands, these cards. Like, I think maybe we're not at the tip of the iceberg because they printed the double face lands, like I mentioned, but I think this is something that they're probably going to explore more because I think they're in the same boat as what you mentioned, Sani, where they want there to be less non games. Like, our Mulligan rule is a good example of that. I personally think this should come into play tapped just because maybe I'm just a boomer and I think these utility lands should not be this free. I think this is fine. I think if they printed like another set where it's literally the same but with different channel abilities, I think that's where it starts getting a little sketchy because then everyone's mana base is going to have all these channel effects or something, and it might not necessarily be too free. You have to kind of pick and choose, but I think it's definitely kind of bordering the sketchy side of if it's a design mistake or not. But maybe that's just me used to having these lands having to come into play tap to have like a relevant ability, right? So
I think a good comparison is the original Kamigawa cycle, where there is I don't know the name of those lands, but the green one I think puts counters on legendaries. So this cycle, and I wish I remembered the name, but those also had like upsides on their untapped mana source, and they're also legendary. So I think it's kind of close to what those are.
Yeah, because I think the red one gave. So it's like Shizo is the black one and gave fear, right? It's like target legend.
Oh yeah, that's the one. So fear is the black
Shinka.
one,
Shinka. Yeah.
and red is first strike, I think.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then Eiganjo is
And the
also
white
the
ones
one.
Yeah,
prevent 2
white one
damage
prevents
to a
damage,
legendary.
Yeah.
and blue one untaps legendary permanents, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But these suck though.
Okay, so
like all those suck. So it's like this, but these are all really, really good. These are like definitely pushed versions of those cards, right?
yeah, no doubt. But like, there's also like almost 20 years between those sets, right?
That's
Yeah,
fair.
I don't know. I also don't think they suck because I don't know if you all have played the Rakdos deck, but those lands are freaking insane. The original Kamigawa ones. The I don't know if it's Shiza or Shinka, but the one that gives fear. Holy shit, that card was insane for me. But that just might be my personal opinion.
I mean, is that because of Ragavan though? Because that's really the only target, right, outside of Luris. Oh, I guess there's Turak too.
You also have Torok.
Kroxa and Torok.
Oh.
Yeah, and the first strike's really big too.
But then I'd argue that you're kind of building around those lands too, or like they're kind of free versus like these are just kind of good in a vacuum. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's the opportunity cost is just so low that I think they're better than a basic,
Yeah, exactly.
But these are definitely better. I think we can all agree on that one. These cards are just absurd.
For sure. So we can start delving into some of the spells in the set. This is obviously a white card that neither of you guys play, but obviously you guys can definitely put in your input here. But March of the Otherworldly Light is a saga hate card essentially. I know, Jun gets Alpine Moon, and Alpine Moon is nice for 1 mana. But this is a way for Abzan to kind of keep up with, being able to answer his saga without being too far behind. I think that's the biggest upside on this card. Being able to just be a 1 mana Stone Rain in response to the chapter trigger so that it can't even generate mana off there as a saga. I think that's the ceiling on this card. I think this is the type of card that, people were comparing to like Prismatic Ending when it first got spoiled. And I think this is a card that should not replace Prismatic Ending. Simply because of the fact that we keep mentioning Ragavan. I think Ragavan's like the elephant of the room. You need your removal spells to answer Ragavan. And this card technically can if you pitch a card to it, but you kind of don't want to, just being a mid-range deck and where every card is so valuable. So I feel like this is a type of card that should supplement Prismatic Ending. You definitely want, your 6 1-mana removal spells, right? Like in Jund, you have Unholy Heat, Bolt, Push, some sort of split. I know in Rock you have Fatal Push and what's the 1-mana sorcery removal spell that destroys a CMC 2 or less?
Bloodchief's Thirst.
Bloodchief's Thirst, thank you. Yeah, so like you're supplementing your removal spell this way. So this is the card that should not replace Prismatic Ending or Fatal Push, but it should be like your 7th or 8th removal spell. Just because the ceiling is high, I think it's a very meta-dependent card, because if there's a meta full of like Tron or Living End where, you're not going to be able to exile the creatures, this is essentially a dead card. So I think it's a very meta-dependent card, and I think as long as Urza Saga is very popular in the meta, this is a card that should probably be at least a 1 of, I think. So I know this isn't in your guys' colors, but what are your guys' thoughts on this card?
Sweet art. That's all I can really say. I love the art on it. I don't know why. It's just like, it kind of reminds me of I don't know what the anime is called, but it's like Spirited Away. I don't know why it just reminds me of that, and like that was like a movie I watched a lot in my childhood, and it just gives me good fond memories. Just art.
Yeah, so I don't want to touch on the art because I usually don't judge cards with their artworks. I think the card has a pretty sweet spot between the sorcery Prismatic Ending and, let's say, Assassin's Trophy as a generic hits everything removal, where you can basically scale whatever you need it for, and the part that it exiles is not irrelevant, I think. And also, like random upside, you can pitch stuff if you really need to. So I'd rather pitch my whatever Esper Sentinel or something along those lines than dying, I suppose.
Or Luris, just
Well,
Oh,
if
no.
you have to, you have to.
Yeah.
yeah.
I think the
I
instant
guess-
speed is a great example too, because like you have push. I mean, like I feel like Jund, you have embarrassment of riches and holy heat, bolt, push. But Abzan, it's just you don't want to play path. Path is awful now. So March is again like I'm really glad you mentioned the instant speed card part of this card, because I think that's what pushes the card to being probably playable.
Yeah. I think the last thing I would touch is it doesn't hit Renin 6, which is kind of huge. It doesn't hit Planeswalkers, which is kind of, I don't know. It's not a non-zero thing, because Renin 6 is a big problem.
Most definitely. And then you kind of, again, that's why you supplement, your playset of Prismatic Ending, right? Like, so I'm glad you really pointed that out, because this doesn't ander to Fairy or Chase.
Yeah.
But it's one of those, I think this is an interesting call. I think it's one of those removal spells where, in Jund, right? Like, how do you decide your Bolt, Fatal Push, Unholy Heat split? How do you determine that? It's always a meta call, right? And I think this card kind of fits in that role where I know like us Abzan players aren't used to having to really pick, because like our removal spells usually answer everything. Like when we had Path, we're like, we don't care if Bolt needs to answer it out. We just have Path. We kill everything. But this card kind of goes back into that. You kind of have to really expect a meta to make sure that this card actually does something versus being a dead card.
I think this card sits in the spot of like Abrupt Decay, I want to say, where it's you wouldn't necessarily treat this as a 1-mana removal spell. It's just a very much corner case that you can kill Saga for 1 mana, but it's more like those 2-mana removal spells that, like, let's say Terminate and Jund, where it scales into the later parts of the game, and this also like scales into the later parts of the game.
I think that's perfect. I think that's what I mentioned. Like I would always say this on stream. Like this card should replace the Abrupt Decay slot. So I'm really glad you said that card, because that's the card. Like again, it's a 2-mana removal spell. I think that's the perfect way to put it. I also want to point out that Spirited Away, if you didn't cry at the end of the movie, you have no soul, because that movie was so heartbreaking.
God, it's so, such a good movie.
It's
Such
a very good movie.
And here I am looking up what the movie was called in German.
No! You gotta watch it. You
have to
gotta
watch
watch it, Sani. It's so good. It's so good.
Maybe I have seen it, but I just don't know what was it called in German.
It's I wish I knew German to tell you, but it's so good. It's so good.
You definitely have to have a box of tissues. That movie broke me.
Oh, it's I know what it's called in German, but I think so. If I'm not mistaken, that's a little girl is looking for her parents, right? In the Okay, so yeah, then I know what it's called in German.
Yeah.
So I've seen it, and it was a great movie. I agree with that.
I need to watch it now. God, it's so good.
The real question is, did you cry at the end? That's the real question here.
I'm not gonna lie, I have no clue, because I was like maybe 6 when I watched it. But
God.
And I remember it terrified me when I was 6, because that was not of the faint of heart for a 6-year-old. Because it's a little spooky, and I remember I was like terrified after that movie.
I guess that's kind of like Lion King too, where it's just a traumatic movie.
Yeah, no, it's just like, what the heck?
Childhood trauma in 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we can move on to. I don't know what's next on the list.
Yeah, it'll be Hidetsugu.
Oh, my part. I
Your
see.
card. Yeah, you can start this off, Sani.
Yeah, so I chose this card. I had it on my list of like interesting cards out of Kamigawa, because like let's be real, this is mostly played for Chapter 1 if you play it, and I think this is a very good hate card against those artifact decks, like let's say Hammer Time, where you basically sweep their entire board and move on from there. And at 3 mana, it's not that expensive that it's necessarily too late. Whereas, like, let's say, what's the green-black sweeper called?
Bowling Ritual?
Yeah, exactly that one. That's also very good against Hammer, but at 4 mana it's kind of expensive, where you kind of risk dying before the sweeper hits. And this one is in a sweet spot, I want to say. Like 3 mana is fine. And the fact that it gets a body later on where you can just actually win the game with, I think is pretty nice. Downside, it doesn't lure us. And I think that's also the main reason why this card won't see that much play as you might expect.
So I think this card doesn't BGX. I think this is a type of card that might spawn its own archetype in a weird way. I think this card might go into some sort of like prison-y, like black red control-y type of deck. Like this is a card that this is the deck that I envisioned when I looked at this card, because I think you're right. Like this card is really really good in this respective metas, because like you're not gonna want to play it in a Tarmogoyf Renin 6, you know, Cruxa deck, because the second chapter is such a big nombo. But I think the first chapter, like you mentioned, and just being a big body, a potential big body as a win condition, I think this is kind of an archetype that hasn't been explored. Because I don't think you want to play this card when you want to play Ragavan, you know, and it's just such a. I think it numbers with almost every permanent in the deck, right? Because like just exiling graveyards and destroying all your permanents kind of is a big number.
And not, yeah. But on the other hand, like I view this as a kind of sideboard card against Hammer.
I mean, even then, like, would you want this knowing that it's going to nuke your own graveyard and shrink your Tarmogoyf? Like, is that Nombo big enough?
I don't think so, because like I also search up Blast Zone with my Reclaimers to sweep them, and I know my Reclaimer is gonna die. But like I feel like I'd rather shrink my Tarmogoyfs than die. And that's
Yeah.
how I view that. Like even if it's a number with Tarmogoyf, it's only a one-time exile effect. You can fetch afterwards, and you can like kill their stuff afterwards, and it's just gonna grow your Tarmogoyfs again. I think the biggest downside, as I already mentioned, is Lurrus, and like Renin 6 not getting back your sagas most likely with this is like the bigger issue than like shrinking your Tarmogoyfs temporarily.
That's fair.
I personally really like this card. Like, I think I would play this in regular Jund. Like, I know that's not what you said, KO, but I think I would love this card in regular Jund, and I would probably just. I don't think it'd be a main deck, because obviously it's more of utility. Like, there's not every matchup where you want it, but like in the matchups where you want it, like specifically Hammer, or I don't know, like I don't know why Goblins has been going around recently. Like, just I'm not sure if you'd even really want it in Goblins, but there are definitely some really good matchups where you want this, and killing your Ragavan on turn 3 where it's already like connected twice, or in those matchups you typically don't even want Ragavan as much, like against Hammer specifically. Like Ragavan is a fine card, but like I'm not sure exactly how many you cut, or if you cut them all, Sani. But like whenever I play against it on Jund, I cut it quite often. But I don't know. I think this card is absurd, and I think the second chapter is actually kind of huge, because something that I've found out with the Rock is I used to cut all of my graveyard hate to find off of Saga. Like, you know, my Nile Spellbomb and Soul Guide Lantern would always cut them. But I realized against Hammer, like if I don't have that graveyard hate, I'm just gonna lose to Luris. And the fact that this just exiles on the second chapter is really big, and that's just like that's my 2 cents of the card. And obviously the other half, I haven't even read because I don't think it's that relevant, but like obviously it's going to be a fine card. But oh yeah, no, the second half looks good too. So
Cool. So then we can go over to, I think, Bob, this is going to be your pick.
hell yeah. Hell yeah, I love this card. So I was a lot bigger on this card before I like played it through a league, but I still think it's very good, and I'm not sure where you want it. But the fact that this makes 2 rat tokens and then just becomes a 3/3 flyer with haste, I thought would be like the solution to Grixis Shadow, right? because that was like, I would say it's not our hardest matchup. Any Blood Moon deck's pretty hard for, I would assume, for any Saga variants, because I think we all run into that issue that Blood Moon just like absolutely annihilates us because it's just annoying and just like destroys your sagas. But this card was like the fact that you get 2 blockers and you get a 3/3 flyer with some evasion and card draw, I thought would be the perfect solution. Although the one problem with this card obviously is they will attack you with your rats and then you don't get them untapped. And also the amount of times that I got dressed down before this flipped was absurd, but I'm not going to be mad if Shadow has to dress down this half instead of dress downing all of my constructs. So I still don't know where I land on this card. I think it's a very viable option. We've talked, like in my Discord, we've talked about Bitter Blossom and other solutions to Shadow, but I feel like this is a pretty decent one as well.
Interestingly enough, I also had this on my shortlist before the set came out as a potential interesting card, and I'm pretty much so Bob pretty much also summarized it already what I was going to say. I think this card is interesting enough that you could maybe spawn a new archetype around this, where you can just abuse the sack ability over and over again. But I'm not sure if this exists, or like the support for this archetype exists yet.
Yeah, for sure. Something I was thinking was a sweet Poxless with Nether Spirit, because it's not a creature, and you still get Nether Spirit back, and Smallpox isn't as bad. So that's been like my brew in my head, but I haven't figured out how to make it work yet.
I just remember.
Origami Pox next.
Yeah. I just remember, Bob, when you played this in Rock, you're like slammed it, and then your opponent like top decked a Yawgmoth, and then they just sacked all the rats in response to flipping it.
Don't get me started.
That I was like, okay, this card really sucks. I mean, I'm sure that's like the worst matchup. Faults. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's definitely not that's why I think it's more of a sideboard card, but. It was tough. It was tough.
I'm surprised that like this is a card that's being a consideration for Grixis Death Shadow. Like, are you hoping that like the 1/1s matter in that matchup? Like once you flip it, like what's kind of the thought process? Because like once you play the 2 mana, like your opponent gets the 1/1. So it's like a very like you're definitely thinking of the long-term game plan, right?
Yeah, so that matchup's super grindy, and like it almost never comes down to like, you know, the first 5 turns. It really kind of goes into like turn 12 against Shadow, because you know, we both have a lot of answers, and the one thing I really like about this is forcing the dress down out of them, because if they don't dress down, the fact that we just get a 3/3 haster in the air is really big, because we don't really have evasion other than Dothy, and Dothy dies to Unholy Heat no matter what, which is kind of a big cost. The fact that the thing has 3 toughness is really huge. So that's something that I really like, and the fact that you get 2 chump blockers against the Death Shadows because they don't run TVR anymore. Or you could just make it a card draw engine, just draw 2 off of it eventually. But those are like the 2 main points I really like about this card.
This goes in the like lingering soul slots that Kevin is running, I think, where it's just very good against the huge bodies that Shadow throws at you. And this also has some random upside that it's like a card advantage engine, essentially.
Yeah. It's definitely a card that I didn't really consider, but then when you guys talk about it and like in contextually against Shadow, like it makes sense. Yeah, I think I'm just spoiled with Lingering Souls. So
yeah, it's also decent against Jund. I remember I was on a Molda 5 in the league that I 5-0'd with my rock list that had this, and this card almost single-handedly won me the game. I ended up losing to like I don't remember what, but. In that game, but this card alone, I was like, wow, this is pretty freaking impressive in a mid-range mirror. Just like going long, this card's very good. So
it's essentially like a Bitter Blossom on a don't want to say budget, but it's different enough from Bitter Blossom, but it's also close enough.
Yeah. I think this is also better in multiples compared to Bitter Blossom. Well, someone might disagree. I think once you start chaining this and you can have the first trigger happen and then you instantly get the rats is really, really sweet. Like once you start chaining them, they are much better than just a singular one.
Oh, because I remember when you played it, you had like 2 or 3, maybe even 4, right? I think I remember I was in your league.
No, I had all 4 copies. I know one game, I think it was against Jun, where I just went turn 2, tribute, turn 3, tribute, turn 4, double tribute, and they just couldn't do anything because, like, I had all 4 in my hand, and there was nothing they could do because that's just, like, the value on that is literally, like, if you have all 4, I mean, obviously, this is a card that's definitely better in multiples, so...
In which case, Bitter Blossom is definitely not.
Yeah, it's weird. Bitter Blossom's kind of good in multiples, but I don't think you want all 4 copies in your hands.
Have you died to your own Bitter Blossom before?
I've never played Bitter Blossom, actually, so...
I
am a noob when it comes to fairies.
So I never actually died to my own Bitter Blossoms, which is funny enough, I think.
Really? I mean,
Sometimes have you guys lost to Bob?
I mean, I think all of us have died to Bob plenty of times, I'm sure.
So I never ran Bob for a long time, I think. When I started playing Jund, there were only like 3 Bobs in the list. Mm-hmm. And pretty soon afterwards, I think Red and 6 came out, and I was like, Bob, you're out of here.
Yeah. I think it's at least double digits, if not triple digits, how many times I've died to Bob.
Really? That's interesting coming from like you playing Golgari and your mana base is a lot less painful, right?
I would say it hasn't happened recently, but like more in paper events. I definitely am a little bit, more relaxed and just have fun. So if I have multiple Bobs, I just say F it. I don't really care. And like I'll just die to it because I don't really like when I don't know, in paper I don't really care to win very much.
Sounds like you just need to, slip Bob a couple more, favors and they're not die to him. All right.
Yeah, for sure.
So
simple solution: don't run Bob.
Yeah. Just don't die to him. It's fine. So we're a card here with Lion Sash, which I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on this card because I know this is a very analogous to Scavenging Ooze. It's essentially a white Scavenging Ooze with some pros and some cons. It gets a +1/+1 counter if it's a permanent card. It's not necessarily tied to exiling a creature or not. So you can exile fetch lands, you can exile Mishra's Baubles, you can exile Sagas, and this will grow the Lion Sash. And then the second upside is you can reconfigure. So being able to equip onto a Lingering Souls token, being able to equip onto a Luris and gain lifelink and give it, be, more immune to like Lightning Bolt or Unholy Heat, or equipping onto an Esper Sentinel so you're more likely to draw a card off it. These are kind of the pros of the Lion Sash on top of growing the construct that Scavenging Ooze might not provide. Obviously the big upside with Scavenging Ooze is you can gain life with the card, which is very, very key in, our BGX decks where we're often with Thoughtseize and Fetch Lands, we're dealing ourselves a lot of damage. So recouping that life is nice with Scavenging Ooze. That being said...
But I think the life gain...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the life gain isn't relevant that much anymore since we all run Shadowspear with Saga now. Mm-hmm. I think, it's not necessarily that Scavenging Ooze is bad, it's just, everything else is just better.
Yeah, for sure.
I've noticed that green is starting to from a Jund and Abzan perspective. I noticed that the green is definitely starting to become the splash, right? Like in Jund you have black red, so it's discard spells, push, Ragavan, and the removal spells, and then in Abzan it's black white with sentinels, discard spells, prismatic ending. So it makes sense that Scavenging Ooze is cut in these two, in Jund and Abzan, just because green is the splash. I'm interesting to see that Skooz isn't played in rock. You know what I mean? I wonder why it's not.
Yeah, I'll tell you why. I've had this question a billion times. Doffy is 500 billion trillion times better than Scavenging Ooze, and you cannot change my mind worth a damn because that card is insane. That is like, I was talking with Sani why I think Rock is like a little bit, I mean, I think it's better. We can have a disagreement. But Dothy is that reason to me. And Dothy just makes your bad matchups like non-existent. The card is just like, Tron, I don't care. I cast their Ulamog, their Karns. There are so many scenarios where the card's great. Equipping with Shadow Spear, getting back Luruses. The amount of times I've beaten Jun just because I have a Dothy, I Thoughtseize away their Lurrus and just get to cast their own Lurrus and just like cast a Dothy back is like countless, and I love it. But that's a little bit of a tangent.
So some of us might have different opinions on Dothy Voidwalker. Not saying who. But so like I could run Dothy. The mana base would support it, and I chose not to because I think the card is so bad.
Oh my god, really?
I think the card is just so bad. Where like I feel like not being able to block is such a huge liability. That I ran the card like right after MH2 was published, I think, a couple of times, and it like never did anything. It was so bad, and there was multiple times where I just died because I couldn't fucking block my opponent's creatures.
All right, can I sell you on one line here before we talk about line Sash a little bit more? Can I just sell you on something real quick? Play Dothy turn 2, turn 3, mill your opponent with Witherbloom command, swipe something. Can I sell you on that line?
No, you can't. So I did the turn 2 Dothy, turn 3 Ashiok my opponent line.
Oh, does that work together, or does that work together?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Okay.
Because Ashiok mills first and then exiles everything.
Oh, okay.
And Dothy replaces the mill.
Okay.
That's why it works. And it was so bad. So I'm not sure. Maybe I'm using Dothy wrong. But I think the card is just so bad.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand your hatred.
So, I really like Voidwalker. I know, Bob, you play 4, I think, the last time I looked at your list. And I think that's where I'm probably like, I don't think it should be a 4 because I get what Sani is saying, where, in a Ragavan heavy meta, like, you need your creatures to block. That's why I run 2. But I disagree at it being bad. It is so good. And I really like how you mentioned that it flips our bad matchups, because I think that's, like, my Tron win rate like skyrocketed.
Oh yeah.
After Voidwalker.
Oh yeah, I've seen some pictures in your Discord, some dirty Tron plays. Ooh, don't get me started. But all right, to talk about Lion Sash, I'm gonna put my hand up for someone who's gotten got by this card because I didn't RTFC. I attacked. I was like, oh, this is just the scavenging news, right? There's no creatures in my bin. I'm good to go. I got like the first 2 times I attacked into this thing. So I think that's pretty funny. But also, KO, I think you sold me on this card. I know last night, I think it was last night you were streaming, or maybe it was the night before, and I was about to ask you how you felt about this card over Scavenging News. But the fact that you get to reconfigure on like Lurrus, Esper Sentinel, or a Lingering Souls token, I think I'm in just based off your comments, like for sure.
It's definitely one of those cards where, like when we most recently played Scavenging Ooze in Abzan Rock and Jun, I think Scavenging Ooze was maybe a 1 of, maybe a 2 of in Rock. I think that's where we left off with the card before it got completely cut. I think this is a type of card where it's just a 1 of. I don't think you really want 2, like with Saga and just how, more clunky Abzan is compared to Rock and Jun. Like, you really don't have the mana, capabilities to really utilize this card to have multiple copies. I think, like, when you draw your second Scavenging Ooze, you're always like, which one? Like, I don't need the second one. You know what I mean? You want the first one to be good.
Yeah.
So, I think this is like a solid 1 of. I think being able to grow constructs is kind of a big reason too beyond Abzan, because if you look at Jund and Rock, like, you don't really run much more artifacts besides the tutor package and baubles. The fact that you have Sentinels and this card and Portable Hole, being able to like churn out 4/4s and 5/5s instead of like 1/1s and 2/2s, I think this is a card that pushes Saga even more. And I think if this card wasn't an artifact, I probably wouldn't play it, but just that subtle synergy with Saga makes it like just that extra cherry on top of making this card playable.
I think what we should mention that it's an equipment, and that's what my first thought was. You can search for this with Stoneforge Mystic, and what I like about the new equipments they printed in Kamigawa is that you have now Stoneforge targets that don't kill your Lurus plan.
Yeah.
And like I thought about running the whatever the double strike one is in red. I think it's bad, but I wanted to try it. So because like double striking Ragavan sounds so nice. And like having these kind of supportive equipments that also aren't like that without a creature, I think is a very nice part in your lore strategies.
I think
this card in Hammer is this in the, I don't know if you, the fish, the jellyfish. Oh my god, those two cards are good. Yeah, no, that card made my Hammer matchup, I would say, a lot closer than it used to be for the Rock, because I used to demolish them, and now that reality chip on its own is like, it's essentially like a, I don't know, experimental frenzy. You have to kill that thing, and it's just like, ugh.
And it's tough because it's an 0-4, right? So like it can't even get bolted from a gen perspective. I mean, we have push, but then if you don't push it before they reconfigure, then like you have to kill the creature and then it's still in play, you know, and I think that's the upside of the reconfigurability, right? So
yeah.
So this will be the last card that we're going to discuss today. It's Soul Transfer. Bob, I don't know if you want to take it away.
All right. So actually, before we even played the set, I remember I went into Sani's stream and we were talking about this card, and like we both were like, "All right, this card sucks." Like before we even played it, we were like, "This card's awful." We were off of it, and I was like, you know what? I'm still gonna try it anyways because it's such a unique effect in Rock that it's at least worth trying, right? It's the same thing with all of these cards. They're all worth trying and seeing if it's good. And to my surprise, this card is quite insane, and I'd almost say stock in the Rock now. I think it's hard to say if this is better or worse than like a Dark Confidant, because they both are like that long game, and they both grind really well. And I'm going to be trying Dark Confidant instead of this in the slot, but I think they're both very good options. The fact that like Takenuma, the reason it's like, I would say arguably the best in the Rock, like addition wise, it's probably better in Jun because it's a little bit easier to get back. But like it was a lot larger of a player in the Rock because we didn't have that effect. And like, you know, with splashing more colors, you get a little bit more powerful. And in the Rock, we just didn't have a way to ever get back our Lurus, and that just sucked. Like Jun gets Kolaghan's command, which is huge. So this is kind of where that compares. Obviously, it's kind of difficult to get both modes, but people have asked me how difficult. And like with 4 Sagas and 4 Elvish Reclaimers, it's not terribly hard to get an enchantment and an artifact, because, you know, you place like a Saga essentially gets you it, and if you have multiple Sagas or an Elvish Reclaimer, it's pretty easy to get, you know, both of these modes online. And the fact that you just have this flexibility of like killing Murktide Region or any Planeswalker, which is kind of huge, and like both modes are very like I would say very shitty on their own. But when they're relevant, they're super duper relevant, because the amount of times that I've just paid like, you know, 6 mana to get back my Lurus, essentially, like the way I compare it is it's just the second companion tax, and I would love to have 2 Luruses in my sideboard, right? Like I think we can all like it'd be great to have 2 Luruses. So
I'm glad that you touched on the K command part, because I think for any deck that's playing black and red, K command is just the better version. It's a clean 2-for-1. It's arguably easier to cast, and I think the instant part is not irrelevant, because like having to tap out against, you mentioned Murktide, is kind of liability, Whereas K command can be used, like I know I can't kill Murktide with K command, but it's just a way to force interaction on their turn.
Yeah.
And this is kind of soft to counter magic a lot of times. That being said, like without K command, this is like close-ish to those kind of effects, where it has the potential for a 2-for-1, and at the end, that's kind of what you want in any mid-range strategy.
Yeah, I was gonna say like, I feel like as we are on Lurus build, on Saga builds, and we're getting more lower to the ground, I feel like we only have so much room for like these 3 CMC cards. Obviously, with the Lurus restriction, but as like sorcery or instant speed removal spells, because I think like Jun only plays maybe 1 to 2 Kolaghan's command, right? And Abzan, like we have Kaya's Guile, so like I think this card competes against those type of effects that are Kaya's Guile is a clean 2-for-1, or if not, it's like you make a body or make them sack, or exile in the yard is almost worth a card, right? So if you're playing like Rock that doesn't have access to Kolaghan's command or Kaya's Guile, like this card seems like a good kind of a card that can fill that role, right? And that's interesting that you mentioned like Reclaimer, because I feel like that it'll only increase your consistency of being able to hit both modes on this card. So that's kind of cool to hear.
Yeah. And I will say 3 CMC I think it's kind of hard to hit it reliably in the Saga decks, but I will say, Sani, try out Golgari Rot Farm, please, because it's been so good for me. Like I don't know how often this happens for you, but personally, the fact that like I keep 2 landers a lot and sometimes you whiff on that second land. I know obviously you have Ragavan to ramp you and stuff like that, but the amount of times I've had to like sack a land, bounce my land back, and hit my 3rd land drop has been so often. It's been kind of impressive. But
I was mentioning this actually yesterday, I think, on stream,
mm-hmm.
that if I were to run a bounce land, it would be the red-black one, due to more red sources than green sources needed. I'm kind of hesitant on that because I think just the fact that it enters the battlefield tapped is so bad for Jund. Whereas, yeah, like basically you have all of your mana each and every turn to spend, and if you're not casting spells, and that's also something I want to mention later to the soul transfer part, you're making Saga tokens.
Yeah.
And in regards to soul transfer, I think the fact that it's a sorcery makes it hard to justify keep spending mana on this. When I'm K commanding, so usually you could go like turn 2 Saga, turn 3 make a token, but sometimes you just want to forgo the token and say like, okay, I'm using my mana to K command, and you don't have this option with the sorcery speed of soul transfer. Yeah, like you're hard committing to whatever you're doing this turn, and like the same with Kaya's Guile. Obviously, you just have the option end of turn to do whatever you feel like. And that's why I feel like the card isn't bad at all, but if you're splashing, I think there are just better options.
Yeah, for sure. I am very much jealous of your rolls. If this card had instant on it, I think it would actually be a real player, and honestly could be better than K Command. Like at least it would be a thought. Whereas if it's sorcery, it depends. Like I think if it was instant, obviously you'd consider it just for Murktide reasons and the fact that you can hit Planeswalkers, which are pretty huge. But that being said, it's a sorcery, and we gotta live with what we got. And I still think it's a fine option, as you said. But it when you're not splashing, when you're specifically Rock, I think this is the best thing we have. So it's sad, but
I mean, I don't think it's sad. I think it's just, there's pros and cons to why we play our respective archetypes,
yeah,
right? And I think when you're playing
yeah.
Rock, you don't have Red and Six, but you have Witherbloom command. You don't have Kolaghan's command, but you have Soul Transfer. It's
Better
and
Red 6.
I mean, I feel like there's trade-offs here, and who's this? And it's, I mean, yeah, you could say Red and Six is better than Witherbloom command in like a vacuum, but I think it's also contextual. And I think there's arguments for both ways. Mana being better, less painful, less mana, like Boseiju and Takenuma are more free. Like these are arguments that could be, why you'd want to. Like, if you look at it in a vacuum with Soul Transfer versus Kola Command's command, obviously you're going to be like, Kolaghan's command's better, Jund is better. But, like, I think it's contextual as a whole, and I think that's why I have to take this card in a package. So. But Absence ran the all of them, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So.
My 2 cents for why Witherbloom Command's better than Rin is more legacy decks play Witherbloom Command. And that's not for any reason. It's just because it's a better card. Don't look into it. It's just a better card.
Okay, so counter argument: more vintage decks play Ren 6 than Witherbloom Command.
Okay, fine. More standard decks play Witherbloom Command.
True. More modern
Pioneer decks.
More modern decks play Ren 6.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. I mean, that means Witherbloom has Pioneer, Standard, and Legacy, and you got Modern and Vintage. So 3-2, right?
For sure. That's how it works.
The math checks out, right?
I'm a rock player.
All right, so I think that's all the cards we are covering today. So I just want to thank both of y'all for coming on and spending, a bunch of your time discussing Kamigawa cards. I think this was really cool to kind of compare and contrast and, learn more new things. I think, example, like when you said, I could just fetch a Reclaimer, Saga with Reclaimer and make Soul Transfer better. I was like, I didn't think of that. So hopefully this kind of data is, useful for all these cards that we talked about. And hopefully we can sway people to try more mid-range decks, and hopefully this kind of content can grow the archetype. So again, thank you both for coming on. I don't know if you want to shout out your socials before we end the video here.
No, but I want to say thanks for having me on, and I really appreciate it. It's fun to shoot the shit with you all. So
for sure.
Yeah, I already mentioned them in the beginning, so just go back to the beginning of the video, watch it again, and I think we're good.
And it'll all be in the description below, so you can definitely check out Sani's Jund content, Bob's Rock content. I think they are both great streamers, great content producers, and I learn a lot from both of their streams. And again, they're always trying new things, always pushing the envelope with cards like Soul Transfer. I definitely would have thought this card would have been playable, but Bob's saying otherwise, so it's definitely worth checking out all of their content. So I really appreciate everyone for tuning in and hanging out. If you want to provide feedback on this video, if you want more of this type of content, please write that in the comments. Other than that, take it easy. Stay safe. Again, please check out Sandy's and Bob's streams. They are amazing content creators. Take care and talk to you next time. Bye.